Thank you, John. This is the moment when... am I? Yes, I am. Very warm welcome from up here, and I'm very happy to see that we've moved closer, and you've moved closer. So this will hopefully be a session that isn't just two people talking down to you, but we'll all be joining in a conversation later on. To start with, it's a great pleasure to be talking to Andrew O'Hagan, who is a writer of so many different genres that we will be hard-pressed to cover everything, and we won't attempt to do everything, don't worry. Before we start talking about literature and get right into the center of things, I do want to ask Andrew something about a topic that was very much talked about the last 2 days, and that is David Cameron and his interesting ideas about the European Union. We couldn't mention this last night, we had to be polite, the ambassador was there, but let's get the white elephant out of the room. Andrew, what would your take, or your take as a Scottish person, be on let's leave the EU, or let's give the British people a vote on a referendum on this?
I was surprised to see that Cameron got such good reviews on that speech. I mean, he seems to have emerged, bless the ambassador and everything in his absence, but he seems to have emerged as the conductor of the national idiocy in so many respects, but especially in this one, where we've got to the stage in Britain where if there's a failure of governance, they call a referendum so that they can blame the people. Of course, the idea of leadership is then slightly corrupted by that, the notion that you elect leaders to make decisions on your behalf based on their experience and insight, and one would hope brilliance. But unfortunately, in this occasion, a long hangover of Euroscepticism is coming to bear on the minds of that party and the country. And I fear that what happened in Ireland and happened in other countries will happen in the UK, which is that the idiocy mob will come to the fore. And I wouldn't like to put money on the success of a yes campaign at the moment in Britain. There's a nascent right-wingery that just needs to be tapped cleverly. And if it is tapped cleverly, then we could be out of Europe. So I think it's monstrous, it's dangerous, and typical.
I think that was...
Sorry to sit on the fence on that one, though. I should be clear about what I feel.
Absolutely. The other interesting aspect is, of course, that before there might be a vote on Europe, there is going to be a referendum in Scotland.
How long have we got?
Sorry, but I need to ask you, because it might not even be the British people voting, but the English on their own by that time.
Well, I think... I'll tell you a little story about this, and then I will betray myself. Always happy to. I made a promise to myself that when I got to the point where I'd lived in England as long as I lived in Scotland, then I'd stop saying things about Scotland through a megaphone. And I'm more or less stuck to that. I get calls every day. I mean, there's calls on the answer phone every day from Scottish newspapers and American newspapers too, and English ones asking if I'll write essays or give a quote about the forthcoming referendum. And I've been sticking to my plan, because last year, it turns out, I had been in London 20 years, and I'd lived in Scotland for 20 years, so, or 21 actually, so I'm getting close to the point where I really should shut up. Mainly because I think it's sort of bad manners to keep commenting on the political decisions being made in a country where you don't pay your taxes. I mean, up to a point, I would stick to that, and I'm trying to, but in the privacy of this room and on the World Wide Web, I feel I could possibly break my rule just for a minute to say that it's been a long time coming. I'm old enough now, in my early 40s, but I'm old enough now to remember the previous independence referendum in Scotland in 1978-79, which was resoundingly against the SNP, the Scottish National Party, and I just hope that there's a repeat of that. I think nationalism is a sort of dead topic. I would hope it was a dead topic for my generation. We're in a post-nationalist world now, I would hope. Of course, to say that is almost absurd, given that everyone in this room has lived through periods of small wars, small mercies, all over Europe as well as the world, and we're about to head into more of them in Africa. So we are heading into them. So it's perhaps a bit hopeful to talk about a post-nationalist situation, but that's how I feel. And I think that so many of my generation feel that we're post-nationalist. We might be post-industrial as well. We're in a lot of post at the moment. We might be in a post-economy. But certainly, nationalism holds absolutely no interest for me. Whatever the sort of collective human values are that one can stir and admire, promote and adhere to, national definition isn't among them for me. I'm very happy to be Scottish in the sense that one has to come from somewhere. I've lived a lot of my life in England and feel incredibly attached to that culture too. To be British and Scottish, or British and English, as Alan Hollinghurst is, seems to me a perfectly wonderful mixture and opportunity that one. Alan was asked last night if he felt he was an English novelist, and the person also said British. And it's wonderful to think of him as both, and to get into questions of dividing your attributes and your qualities along national lines. It's just a horrendous throwback to me.
So we definitely will hope that sanity, like you've outlined, prevails. You've outlined post-economic, post-national. It is definitely not a time of post-literature times. And to get to your work, let's start with the moment when you actually came to London. You had a very interesting piece about how you came to London, expected the city to be at your feet and for you to conquer, and that through a job in charity, you actually came to realize a potential for writing. Am I interpreting this right?
Yeah, I don't think the city would fall at my feet. I don't think I said that, but it would have been nice if it did, and I'm still, hoping for that. But no, I thought that London was a sort of magical place. I did have a slightly Dick Whittington notion of what London must be like, the paved with goldness, certainly. But when I got there, it just seemed rather sort of rainy, and nobody seemed to talk to each other. That was the cliche. Scottish people always say that people in London are unfriendly. They're not actually, but you need to live there for 20 years to discover that. For the first year, it's misery, because in Scotland, people stop to speak to each other. And there's a famous thing about people stopping you on the stairs in Glasgow. If you're in a tenement building, you're walking up the stairs, nobody would ever just walk straight past you. That would be thought to be a sort of crime. They would stop and say, "Who are you, and why are you in this building, and isn't it nice to see you, and do you want a cup of tea?" It can go quite far, the meeting people on the stairs thing. I think all the sexual encounters that ever happened in Scotland began on the stairs, certainly for me. But London seemed so sort of different from that, and people were there's a lot of little villages, London, and it took a while to get used to that. Now, I did work for this charity. It was called St Dunstan's, which some of you might know is an organisation for the war-blind, the war-blinded. It was founded in 1915, where there was a house in Regent's Park where blind ex-servicemen, basically men blinded on the Somme and elsewhere, would come back, mustard gas attacked mainly. These men would come back blinded and would be retrained, if you like, in this centre in Regent's Park. There's wonderful photographs of little girls leading these men with bandaged eyes across the park. I was very struck by it, and I realised when I worked there, I had an absurd job, which was to edit a magazine, because generations of blinded ex-servicemen were looked after, through the Second World War and then all the wars, from Suez, Falklands, the conflict in Northern Ireland. Many men were blinded in bomb attacks and so on, and still are. So they would come and be looked after by this organisation. The very absurd thing was that my job, age 21, was to edit this magazine where I'd spend all night sizing photographs and writing captions and writing a column and so on, notices for this magazine that nobody else could see apart from me. So it was like a kind of Monty Python sketch on the Marylebone Road where I'd be up there of an evening sort of with a bottle of beer and sort of editing this magazine so lovingly. And it went straight onto a talking book afterwards. But there was this hard copy that I got to admire and sort of sat there with. So that started, and there was a job advertised in the London Review of Books, which was a magazine I'd always liked, and I thought that if you wrote for the London Review of Books, it meant that you were one of the best writers in the world.
Is that not true?
Well, I hope it's true. I certainly felt so then, and still feel that, actually. I feel guilty saying that. It feels like a piece of self-puffery to say it now because I write for it or that I'm associated with it in some way. So that was why I was dodging the bullet there. But it is a great magazine. And in those days, I thought, Jesus Christ, you'd open an issue and there would be, Angela Carter on the history of the potato and Christopher Hitchens attacking Henry Kissinger and Martin Amis writing about men's trouble with men and Alan Hollinghurst writing, any number of subjects. I just loved the paper and thought, I can't believe it, they've got this job. How the fuck am I going to get that job? There was some lowly editorial assistant type thing, and I thought, oh God, what can I do? So I went to the Kensington Library, and I just sort of stuffed my head with every single fact. Editors are always very vain, by the way. I knew that even then. And I thought, if I can remember everything there is to know about the paper, including the pieces that were written by the editors themselves, then I'm possibly in there. And I went in, there was a wonderful, now legendary man called Carl Miller, who edited the London Review. He'd been a brilliant editor of The Listener before that, and The New Statesman, its literary pages and so on. He's a fantastic man, still is. And he was very tough. And I came in and he said to me, are you one of those men who wears T-shirts? And I said, yes, I am. He said, I can tell. You're one of those young men who wears T-shirts, whereas I am about to step into a box in the ground. He said, he was only 61. When I think about it, he seemed older than that. Anyway, he asked me a lot of difficult questions, including this. Imagine going to an interview and someone says, can you name 3 contemporary Irish poets and talk about their relationship to the work of W.B. Yeats? So I waffled on about Paul Muldoon and Seamus Heaney and all that until I was blue in the face, but they gave me the job. But I did compliment all their pieces that were in the paper.
And you're no longer in T-shirts, so...
No, I've given them up.
There is a quote in that article about your experience working for St. Dunstan's. It showed me what the imagination might do for finding and preserving lives for the page, engaging in other people's lives and biographies. And I think that is what interested you in your first book, a non-fiction book called Missing, where you write about people who really have gone missing and what this did for their families or did to their families, and that space of emptiness that is left over. Why choose a subject? How did you get drawn into that?
It's funny. It's very much as it was described last night. That I would go further. Things do agglomerate, and material attracts material to itself in a very odd, very difficult to describe way. But as a writer, you begin to notice that happening. You hear a voice, or you find a legend, or you look at a subject, or you see a report, you get involved in reporting a thing, and then it begins to attract all sorts of material, including psychological material, to itself. And with The Missing, I couldn't really tell you with any accuracy 20 years down the line why I wrote that book. I just knew that there was something in the contemporary atmosphere that was under-described in the UK, that there was a kind of social anomie that had never found its occasion on the page, that there wasn't the book that I wanted to read. There were books about poverty and the dispossessed and the condition of Britain and so on, but there was just a strangeness, a kind of uncanniness in Britain during those latter years of the Conservative government that I felt hadn't found its moment. And that's all I knew. As a writer, I knew that there was something in the atmosphere that perhaps could find its way into prose if you could just get the prose right. Beyond that, I was surprised by how deeply involved I got in those murder cases and how deeply I got involved with people who'd gone missing. I was very young myself, so I was able to sort of throw myself into it in a way that would be almost unthinkable now. I slept in homeless shelters. I was drinking with those people under the bridges at Waterloo Station. I felt I had to, it was a bit of a kind of method acting book that I went too far into it and became sort of, I stepped inside the language of the subject, if you know what I mean. I felt I had to. And I was young enough to find that natural. I had the energy and also the lack of sort of self-regard, I think, is part of it. As a writer, you get a mortgage. You begin to respect yourself slightly too much, and it's never a good thing, but you don't want to leave the house in that way. You certainly don't want to go under Waterloo Bridge in your 40s, the way you're happy to in your 20s, or I was. That's why so many brilliant essayists and reporters stop writing. When you think of the essays, I mentioned Martin Amis before, he was a very, very brilliant writer of reportage in his 20s and 30s, and then stopped, because the pavement-pounding aspect becomes slightly beneath people, I'm afraid. But I don't feel it's beneath me yet, but I mean, I did love doing it then. The zeal for it was there. And The Missing grew out of all that. It was a book that was very much picked up from following a trail. And I was surprised by the reaction to it, because it seemed that initial ambition to try and bottle an atmosphere, people felt it had done, and I was delighted. I mean, it was a great moment for me, because I wasn't sure at the beginning whether I could write a book.
So, and of course, after that, you did write your first novel called Our Fathers, which is very much a book about Scottish history. It's four generations of people who are present in key moments of Scottish history, but the core story is basically about Hugh, the grandfather of the narrator, who in the 50s and 60s was part of that idealistic re-urbanization movement in Glasgow, and part of the idea, let's get people out into lovely new clean high-rises so they get a view and they can breathe. And his grandson, who's the present time hero or narrator, is now in Glasgow to actually pull down those high-rises. And in just one image, you've caught a metaphor of the rising up of a utopian idea and its demolition. That is quite a sad outlook, but the energy of the writing seemed to be with the
a melancholy book that now, I think. When I think, it didn't feel melancholy while I was writing it. It felt celebratory. I felt as if I was trying to capture that trajectory, which was actually very short. It was within the compass of my life then. I wrote the book when I was 29. And within that period, those tower blocks, those post-war tower blocks had gone up in Scotland as they went up all over Europe with enormous utopian fanfare. They were clearing the slums. The post-war experience was going to be different. And there was a kind of evangelical zeal about the building of those tower blocks. And they went up and then came down with a sort of tremendous sense of loss and destruction and a failure of a social experiment. They came down in my time. I remember standing as a student beside, there was famous ones in the Gorbals in Glasgow, which of course was a famous slum, and it was meant to be delivered from this slum condition by the building of these tower blocks. A man called Basil Spence, Sir Basil Spence, as he built these famous tower blocks. But there was a couple of very significant human failings, which for a novelist becomes, incredible oxygen. One is that they hadn't thought about how to get a coffin down. So people were dying on the top floors and they had to be carried down in a chair because they couldn't get a coffin in the lift. That's the kind of thing that, and also the Scottish weather hadn't been taken into consideration. So the flats became damp almost immediately. So people were living in these little furry black boxes. The rooms were actually freezing. It was an incredible failure. And yet, I wanted the novel somehow to carry, if you like, the belief at both ends, the belief that they were a great idea and the belief that they should now be taken down. It seemed to me a sort of almost a political fable in that, if I could get to it. Yeah, I mean, it was it was a movement. You know, sometimes you just find yourself as a novelist accidentally. You start with voices and you end up with a movement or something social. There was an argument between Henry James and H.G. Wells about the social utility or not of the novel. And I felt, as with so many things, completely in each of their sides. That they each had a brilliant argument. You know, Henry James' interiority and his notion of what prose is and the dimensions of mind that can exist in prose, I completely believe and adhere to and love when I see its footprint in other writers. But Wells's notion that you can actually have that the novel can have a social function to clarify or replenish the imagination of a generation or one reader, if to be less ambitious. And I like that notion too.
So that means you are straddling two, in a way, wildly opposed ideas of how to write. And I think it does, the search for utopias or for some grander idealistic concept informs many of your works.
Every one of them, actually. I mean, every one of the books I now notice, you never, as Alan was saying last night, you don't set out to write a book in which there's finally a great female character. You know, you just don't, you know, or you don't set out perhaps even to write a gay novel necessarily. I mean, maybe we'll talk more about this later in the day, but it's a form of osmosis. What matters to you comes through the semi-permeable, you know, imagination. You just find it traveling, and you end up with a thing. And when I look now, though, accidentally, all my books are about people wanting a better life and wanting to travel, usually via their imagination, from one place to another, whether it's a house builder who's trying to sort of deliver this vision of a better life for the working class of Glasgow, or it's a character who's, you know, got a singing talent and lives on a small island who wants to get to London, and the journey represents so much for her. And those investments of feeling, which I think novelists, certainly in my case, often start with an investment of feeling. I just know that something matters to me, and I don't know why.
The book that you refer to as Personality, which we'll come to in a moment, but I would like to go on to Be Near Me, because that again is very clear in its Scottish setting, and this is a small parish, and a new Catholic priest arrives here, and he is so much a fish out of water. He's English, he's Oxford, he's got the wrong accent, he's the wrong class for this small community, so he is a misfit in the most obvious sense, and yet he is also looking for ideals for a life that he wants to give other people an idea of, you know, well, not only God, but a better way of living. And of course, it all goes horribly wrong. You didn't set out to write a sort of religious novel in the Graham Greene vein, did you?
Not at all, no. It started actually with the notion that comes out of what I said previously of liking duality. Actually properly, not just liking it, but inhabiting it. I mean, I love Virginia Woolf's comment that nothing is simply one thing. And for me, that's sort of almost too true, that I love the idea of a novel in which the voices of my childhood on that housing estate, the sort of working class voices out of those houses, would be confronted by a sort of aesthete. That's really where the book started. It wasn't a religious novel at all. The aesthete happened in the end to be a Catholic priest, because I've always been interested in the way aesthetics and Catholicism have a relationship. That's just another sort of strand of interest for me, and I love the way that there was a line, there was a brilliant man called Monsignor Gilby, one of those Englishmen. You could write, you know, a tetralogy of novels if you had the skill about the life of this man. But anyway, he died. He's one of those English monsignors who was sort of so high church, Church of England, that he was sort of more Catholic than the Pope. But he wore a very red satin hat and very red high heels, and there was an obituary of him in the Telegraph, sometimes the best piece of prose to be read of a day in England. Not so much true now, but 15 years ago, the best prose to be read of a day was the Telegraph obituaries. There was a brilliant man who edited those, and he was a genius when it came to just, talk about Henry James. The level of implication in these was just stunning. And of course, they had a whole language about, if people were spirited, it meant they were an alcoholic, and all that. Furtive, it was wonderful. So I read these with enormous relish every morning, and everybody, all my friends would say, "What the fuck's wrong with you? You're obsessed with those obituaries." Because people always expect me to be reading Tottenham Hotspur or the Glasgow Herald or sort of the Journal of Proletarian Studies or something, I don't know. But anyway, this guy died, and the first line, which I can remember verbatim, it made my year. It said, Monsignor Gilby died, it is said, at the Athenaeum Club, surrounded by his young friends, he died, happy. Stop. It is said he died somewhere between the lobster salad and the bœuf en daube. At which point, I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. This was the funniest thing, and the most brilliant, and a whole character emerged. This man, he was always being chased by, the news of the world for being, having affairs with boys. He obviously had this great life and everything, and I thought, I need to get some of the energy of him into a character, but I need to confront him with a world that would be utterly strange to him, and him to them. So that kind of thing, you know what I mean? That you begin with a sort of a moment of delight or inquiry, and before you know it, I was writing a religious novel, as people called it.